we are going to tackle sterilization and disinfection kasi this is an integral part, vital part of laboratory safety. Tsaka ng overall lab services. Ayun, importante ang, of course, 'di ba, sa microbiology, you're handling specimens na talagang delikado. So may mga guidelines na dapat sundin and measures na dapat masunod. So microbiologists should be knowledgeable, properly trained and equipped with proper PPEs, 'di ba, engineering, working controls, while performing the duty. Kasi kung sloppy ka sa trabaho mo or sa duties mo, magkakaroon ng unnecessary exposure to infectious agents. 'Di ba yung conspiracy theory nga sa sa COVID daw. Oh, but anyway, so first, magkakaroon tayo ng super short lang na Q&A, like 3 questions lang ata to. Type nyo lang sa chat box ang sagot. Kung sinong maunang makakuha ng tama, may plus points. Charit. Kaano ko naman kayo, di ba? Walang ibang block dito. Si tsaka D lang. Si tsaka D lang. Ayan. So first, i-type nyo sa chat box ang sagot nyo. So first question, ayan. It is having the property of inhibiting bacterial growth or multiplication. A, bactericidal, B, bacteriostatic, C, biocide, or D, sterilization. Sige, sagot lang kayo. Puro A nakikita ko, ha. Ayan, si Mr. Sino ba? Nakita na akong tamang sagot. Ang nauna si Miss Patricia May Reyes. Anong block mo? Miss Patricia?
Block D po.
Ayan, I'll take note. Ang tamang sagot is B, bacteriostatic. Andyan yan sa handout nyo kay Sir Ken sa first page. So, si Miss Patricia Reyes. Alright. Okay, congrats, Miss Patricia. May mga nakakuha din na iba, pero pasensya na nauna si Miss Patricia. Ayan, si Mr. Ken Likigan. Ayan, tama rin. Ayun, so, discuss lang natin yung definition of terms para at same page tayo mamaya sa kalagitnaan discussion. So, sterilization, it is the process of complete removal or destruction of all forms of microbial life which may be affected by physical and chemical means. So, complete removal or destruction ng lahat ng microbial life. Hindi lang pathogenic, kahit non-pathogenic, it's sterilization. Ang bacteriostatic naman, it's inhibiting bacterial growth or multiplication but not necessarily killing the microorganism. So it only inhibits its growth and its multiplication. Ang bactericidal naman, ayan. Ang bactericidal naman is having the property of killing or destroying the bacteria. And ang biocide, or the term biocide, is a chemical and physical agent that is usually broad spectrum that inactivates microorganisms. So ito naman not necessarily na iba-iba sila, although iba-ibang aspects nila sa term, pero yung gamit sa kanila, it depends kung sa clinical ba to or like sa medicine. Makikita niyan mamaya, later on. So next we have sterilization and disinfection. So what's the difference? Ang sterilization, sabi ko nga, is complete removal or destruction ng all forms of microbial life, while disinfection is the process of killing or removing the microorganism on inanimate surfaces through the use of chemical objects. So inanimate surfaces through the use of chemical agents. So that's the difference ng sterilization tsaka disinfection. Sa disinfection naman, meron tayong tinatawag na germicide or the disinfectant and the antiseptic. So which is which? Ang germicide or disinfectant are chemical substances used to kill infection-producing microorganisms on surfaces, kasi nga under siya ng disinfection, but it is too toxic to be applied directly to the tissues. So pag sinabi mong germicide or disinfectant, tandaan nyo na hindi siya pwedeng i-apply directly on tissues. While antiseptic naman is same mechanism, it kills microorganisms or prevent their growth, pero it is applied topically on living tissues. So yun lang ang difference nila. So see, parang pareho ng mechanism, pero the way you use the term, it differs like ng ito, kung saan siya gagamitin, kung ano yung i-disinfect. Ayun lang. So next question. Sagot ulit kayo sa sa chat box. Ayan. So septic is the presence of pathogenic microbes in living, true or false to in living tissue or associated fluid, while aseptic is the absence of pathogenic microbes. True or false? Ang bilis. Sino ba nauna? Ayan, 608. 3D ulit, no? Si Miss Dina Rodriguez. Ay, Rodriguez ba to? Sorry, hindi ko makita yung buo. Tama, 3D? May one last na lang mamaya. So, tama. Ang correct answer is true. Diba? Kasi ang aseptic techniques, diba, meron tayong tinatawag natin aseptic technique yung pagsuot ng sterile gloves, sterile gowns, yung mask for the patient and healthcare provider. Lahat yun aseptic techniques. So, parang aseptic technique and clean technique are two closely related healthcare practices that both aims to keep yung people or the frontliners safe from infection. So, the aim of using aseptic technique is to eliminate the germs, as I've said, which are disease-causing microorganisms. So, clean technique focuses naman on reducing the number of microorganisms in general. So, ayan, congrats kay Miss Dina ng 3D. Last question. May sample case tayo dito, tapos sabihin nyo lang kung what is. Parang ano yung may infer nyo sa case na to. So, ang case natin is may severe case ng COVID-19 patient na na-admit sa ICU. So, the patient required prolonged mechanical ventilation, including wait lang. May sagot na agad. Ang bilis nyo, teka lang. Including positioning, heavy sedation, and muscle blockers for several weeks. So, later on, the patient developed bacterial ventilator-associated pneumonia. So which is which? Is it an opportunistic infection? Is it a community-associated, is it a nosocomial infection, B, or is it community-associated infection, C, or it's a misdiagnosis? So ang mga sagot nyo is, nakakalito naman kayo agad-agad. Teka lang, I'll check. So ang may sagot dito si Miss Erica is, ayan, nakita ko na. 3D na naman. Galing-galing naman. Ang bilis nyo. Siguro may kopya kayo ng presentation ko. Ayan, 3D. Tama. Ang tamang sagot natin is B. Wait lang. B, it's nosocomial infection. You'll know later on kung ba't siya nosocomial. So, Jinky ano to? Sorry, I can't see the whole name.
Dawangan po, ma'am.
Jinky Dawangan. Ayan. Congrats. So, may synchronous session kayo sa akin, magpapa-plus points. So, kahit ba naman 1 point lang, ma-add dun sa scores nyo. Pero sorry, may nagsabi sa akin na mahirap yung quiz nyo last time. So, medyo dinalian ko yung susunod na quiz nyo. Pero mag-review pa rin kayo, please. Ayan. So, congratulations. Yan ang last question ko sa ngayon. Nosocomial infection or yung hospital-acquired, di ba, infection. Andun din yun sa definition of terms sa copy nyo. Ayan, so let's start. Sa antimicrobial physical agents, first is we have the moist heat. So moist heat kills microorganisms more effectively than dry heat. So later on, we'll tackle about dry heat agents. That its lethal effects, of course, it denatures and coagulates the proteins. So under this moist heat, we have 5 subtypes under the moist heat. First is we have boiling. So the principle of boiling is 100 degrees Celsius for heating, 100 degrees Celsius for 10 to 15 minutes. So boiling is for sterilization of surgical instruments, the needles, hypodermic syringes, rubber stoppers, etc. So it kills all vegetative organisms but not all spores or viruses. So 'di ba apart from yung weapon ng bacteria na toxins, 'di ba? Some pathogenic bacteria have shield to help them survive yung cooking process, hence yung boiling. So bacteria can live in a vegetative state in which they can grow and reproduce, and few can also exist in spore. It's spore form, which is unable to grow or reproduce but can help the bacteria to survive in an environment na favorable sa growth nila. Di ba? Kaya matitindi ang mas mahirap patayin ang spore-forming microorganisms. So, example natin ng spore-forming, ano yung mga yun? Di ba natakal nyo yun kay Sir Kenya? Like yung sa bacillus natin, Clostridium. Ayan. So, in boiling, it kills all vegetative organisms but not all spores or viruses. So, number 2 naman, under moist heat is autoclaving. So, its principle is steam under pressure. Diba? Steam under pressure kasi nga under siya ng moist heat. So, under the steam under, sa steam under pressure, may dalawa tayo. Heating at 121 degrees Celsius, 15 psi for 15 minutes. So, PSI is, di ba, unit of pressure. PSI or pounds of force per square inch of area or pounds per square inch. So, ang 121 and heating in 15 minutes is usually applied sa mga media natin, sa utensils or glass pipettes, sa instruments and liquids sa laboratory. Usually, meron kasi tayong tinatawag na displacement sterilizer. So, parang it's heating 121 for 30 minutes. So, ito yung mga broth nga natin sa culture media. Itong 132 degrees Celsius naman, ng 30 to 60 minutes, it is displacement sterilizer din. Pero kapag ginamit kasi natin yung pre-vacuum sterilizer, pwede siya at 4 minutes. Ayan. So, autoclaving is the most rapid and most efficient means of destroying bacteria. And all organisms, except yung prions natin and spores, are killed within 15 minutes. So it is used to sterilize, sabi ko nga kanina, di ba, yung culture media. So ang biological indicator natin dito is Geobacillus or Bacillus stereothermophilus. So ito ay rod-shaped gram-positive bacterium, and it's a thermophile. Tsaka widely distributed siya sa hot springs, sa ocean sediments, and it also causes spoilage ng food products, no? So yung biological indicator natin, nakita niyo vials dito, may without growth and with growth. So ginagamit siya as biological indicator. Like kung yung vials natin contains spores from Bacillus stereothermophilus, diba? Yung microorganism that, it is a microorganism that can be inactivated when exposed to yung 121 degrees Celsius saturated steam for 15 minutes. So, autoclaves, yung autoclaves natin used to treat biological waste. So, parang ginagamit siya as indicator kung may growth, kung may growth siya, then hindi siya umabot nitong 121. Pero pag without growth, then yung autoclave natin is working, is working properly. So yan lang naman ng, basta tandaan nyo, may iba-iba tayong biological indicators per agent, antimicrobial agent. So next, meron tayong flow steam. Ang principle naman nito, ang flow steam minsan, the term used here is fractional sterilization or intermittent sterilization. So ang principle niya is tyndalization. Ano may tyndalization? Parang discontinuous heating siya na boiling at 100 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes for 3 consecutive days. So, ang tyndalization is, tandaan nyo, boiling 100 degrees Celsius siya for 30 minutes ng 3 consecutive days. So, paano ba yun? Parang, kunyari, ngayon, today, or nag-burn ka ng, nag-boil ka for 30 minutes, then stand mo siya ng 24 hours, then the next day, i-boil mo ulit siya for 30 minutes then again. Tapos yung third day, same. So 3 consecutive days na 30 minutes, pero dapat in-stand mo siya ng 24 hours. So actually, yung last na, process na on the third day is just a precaution kasi sabi nila sa 2 days na yun, parang sa 2 days na yun, nagawa na niya yung sterilization needed. So, sinasabi dito, it is used to sterilize heat-sensitive culture media containing carbohydrates. So, ganun na. Kasi ang inspissation natin naman is sa protein. Sorry, hindi ko pala nalagay dito. So, kung ang flowing steam natin is carbohydrates, ang inspissation is protein. Pala siya na-include. Ayan, so ang principle naman nito is thickening through evaporation. And it is heating at 70 to 80 degrees Celsius for 2 hours ng 3 consecutive days. So same principle, the difference is yung flowing steam natin is for carbohydrates and yung inspissation is for protein. So this is 70 to 80 degrees. Enough na tong temp na to because, di ba, normally yung vegetative proteins natin coagulates at 60 to 65, di ba, degrees Celsius. Sa kayo noon. Ganyan. Ayan. So, yung inspissation means stiffening and of protein without coagulation as the temperature is below coagulation temp. So, the media containing serum or egg is sterilized by heating 3 consecutive days. So, example natin, di ba yung LJ, Lowenstein Jensen medium, na growth is specifically for Mycobacterium species, and yung Dorset egg medium, same for Mycobacterium species. Pasteurization naman natin, there are 2 methods. So first is yung LTH or low temperature holding pasteurization, yung LTH, or termed also as batch method, which is heating at 63 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. Ang HTST naman natin, or the high temperature short time, or the flash method, is heating at 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds. So this is termed as quick heating, then immediate cooling. So para lang magkaroon kayo ng idea kung anong difference ng dalawang to, this can be actually applied, or may mga programs na dito sa mga feeding, parang yung mga lactating mothers, sa bahay ng mga milk ng kanilang mga baby. So ayan, may program dito na tinuturuan yung mga mothers nila on how to do sterilization at home. So first is, etong nakita nyo sa gilid is the holder pasteurization or itong LTH, low temperature holding pasteurization. So, kaya siya tinawag na low temp kasi first, ito yung milk nyo in glass milk bottles or canning jars na dapat filled lang siya ng 4/5 full of milk para meron pang room for expansion when heated. Then, ang number 2 nyo is placing the bottle or jars on the rack inside a large canner. So, if you fill natin tong canner na to ng hot water or warm water until the water level is slightly above the milk level in the jars. And then, third process is heating na at 63 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. Pero dito sa heating, tinuturo na kailangan yung cover, naka-cover yung remaining jar with aluminum foil. Tapos, you can punch a hole in the center, then insert a thermometer para ma-check nyo dapat na 63 degrees Celsius siya. And also, dapat ma-achieve yung uniform distribution ng heat dun sa container. Then, continue heating pa rin for 30 minutes. And then, after 30 minutes, gradually replace the hot water with cold water to cool the milk. So, if this is not done gradually, syempre yung bottles natin may break. So, kaya siya low temp holding pasteurization. Then, ayun na. After sa cooling process na niya, at 27 degrees Celsius dapat, pababain mo pa siya up to ref temp or 4 degrees Celsius na gradual process lang. Unlike itong flash method natin, na kailangan yung milk natin nakalagay sa heat-resistant glass. Tapos yung amount ng milk should be between 50 ml and 150. Kasi pag malaki masyado, pwedeng i-divide mo siya into 2 jars. Also to allow expansion ng milk. Tsaka ito kasi, di ba quick heating siya. So mataas agad, mas mataas na temperature and fast lang. So place again the jar inside the canner. Tapos yung water level natin should be at least 2 fingers above the level of the milk para buo yung milk natin will be heated equally. Then, i-heat na siya at 72 degrees Celsius. Heat mo na siya at 72. Tapos, very quick lang, 15 seconds. Then, gradual or immediate cooling. Kaya siya kailangan nasa heat-resistant glass jar para hindi siya mabasag because this process requires gradual cooling. Then, ayan, storage na niya is dapat may lid yung container. So, yun lang ang difference niya ng LTH and HTST, sorry. So, it is used to partially sterilize the organic solutions by heat without altering the chemical properties. And it is used to make beverage and food safe for consumption, and it eliminates foodborne pathogens and organisms. Hence, di ba yung application natin sa pasteurization of milk. So, tinuturo ito sa mga mothers with babies. Ayan. So, next na tayo, the dry heat na. So, we're done with moist heat. So, now we move on to dry heat methods. So, dry heat, ang lethal effect niya is also protein denaturation, oxidative damage, toxic effects of elevated levels of electrolytes. So, first is flaming with Bunsen burner. For flaming, the mouth of culture tubes and slides. Para sa wait lang guys. Para sa sterilization ng mouth ng culture tubes natin and slides, and also burning with Bunsen burner naman yung wire loops natin or forceps na ginagamit sa plating. Tsaka straight wire.
Tinakaubukan di manong niya itong.
Okay. Next, we have hot air oven and hot air sterilizer or the dry heat oven. Its principle is heating at 160 or 270 degrees Celsius for 1.5 to 2 hours. And ang biological indicator naman natin dito is Bacillus subtilis var. Niger, or the variant is the Niger strain. So it kills all organisms including the spore formers, itong hot air oven, and used mainly for the glasswares, the certain metals and oils as well. Well, in incineration naman, it is used for the destruction of sputum cups, di ba, for collection of usually sa may PTB or pulmonary tuberculosis, sa garbages natin and used dressings. So yung burning, it involves burning of materials into ashes at 870 to 980 degrees Celsius. So imagine kung gaano siya kainit. Cremation naman, ito yung ginagawa sa mga COVID patients natin. So it involves dead bodies to ash for control of communicable disease. Example is COVID-19. Freezing naman, its lethal effects is still protein denaturation and toxic effects of elevated intracellular concentration. So it is not a reliable method of sterilization and considered bacteriostatic lang because it includes the rate of, it reduces the rate of metabolism. This at 0 to 7 degrees Celsius. Diba kaya nga yung foods natin, nilalagay natin sa ref temp or at low temperature to limit bacterial growth. But it does not, sabi nga dito, it's not a reliable method of sterilization because it cannot kill yung temperature na ganun lang siya kababa, cannot guarantee killing of unwanted microorganisms. So repeated freezing and thawing are more destructive than prolonged freezing. So it is used in the preservation of bacterial cultures via lyophilization or freeze drying. Ang example natin dito is sa Treponema pallidum, which is killed at refrigerator temperature within 3 days. So sinasabi na yung survival ng T. pallidum natin is at 120 hours or 3 days or more sa blood at 4 degrees Celsius. Diba yung T. pallidum sa agent of?
Pinautot ako.
Yes. Ang T. pallidum is sa syphilis. Ayan. So radiation naman, may dalawang subtypes, the non-ionizing and the ionizing radiation. So ang non-ionizing radiation, its lethal effect is the UV light is attributed to the absorption and resultant damage to DNA. Oh my gosh. Guys, na-record ba? Recorded ba yung session? Hello, anyone?
Meron po, ma'am.
Alright, sige, sorry. Wala kasi ako nakikita. Saan ba nakikita pag-recording? Hindi ko kasi nakikita. But anyway, thanks. Sige, so let's continue. Non-ionizing radiation, the UV light is attributed to the absorption of resultant damage to DNA. So the molecular level ang nadadamage ng radiation. So producing a thymine dimer. It has longer wavelength, yung non-ionizing natin, and has low energy content compared sa ionizing radiation, but poor penetrating power. So it is primarily used to control airborne infection in enclosed areas such as sa hospital wards and operating rooms. Ang ionizing radiation naman natin is also termed as cold sterilization. So its lethal effects also is the damage to DNA, and this produce peroxide instead of thymine dimers in non-ionizing radiation. So it is used to sterilize the catgut and nylon sutures and disposable medical supplies such as plastic syringes, catheter, and vaccines. So itong mga sterilized catgut and nylon sutures, di ba yung ginagamit sa, catgut is tough cord made from intestines of certain animals. Like yung sa sheep na ginagamit sa surgical ligatures. Aware kayo, ayan. And it has short wavelength with very high gamma rays, ang ionizing radiation. Itong ionizing radiation kasi it sends enough energy into the bacteria. Sa example, kung food ang paggagamitan, it breaks the chemical bonds sa bacteria. So this damages yung pathogens enough for them to die or can no longer multiply, which reduces yung spoilage pag sa food. So ang ating biological indicator for ionizing radiation is the Bacillus tumulus. Or its spores kasi have been used to monitor yung sterilization process ng ionizing radiation. So dapat spore forming, hence the B tumulus. Next is filtration. So filtration natin is used to sterilize heat labile substances such as yung ating serum, plasma, so blood products, urea, acetic fluid, carbohydrate solutions, antibiotic solutions, yung vaccines, and radioisotopes. So it is used with both liquid and air. So types ng filters natin, we have yung Berkefeld, various infusorial earths or diatomaceous earths. Yung Chamberlain, the unglazed porcelain. So I guess you just have to memorize this. Ayan, sa compressed asbestos natin, yung SATES and membrane filters natin, for the millipore at 0.22 micrometers, yung pore size niya, 100% bacterial. That achieves 100% bacterial sterility. Ang osmotic pressure naman, it is the use of high concentrations of salt and sugars in food, creating a hypertonic environment. Diba? Kaya sa mga foods natin, ang preservatives natin is usually sugar or salt. So plasmolysis as water is, when water leaves the cell, the plasma membrane shrinks away from the cell wall. And cell may not die, but usually stops growing. Di ba yung may mga bacteria tayo that can live in high osmotic pressured environments. Pero most of yung mga bacteria talaga cannot tolerate this. Because bacteria are dehydrated by hypertonic solutions. It causes the cell functions of the bacteria to shut down. Some bacteria actually can survive a hypertonic environment because some of them, sabi ko nga kanina, di ba, can maintain yung availability ng water in the environment with high solute concentrations by increasing the solute concentration within yung cells nila. So these are, di ba yung sa previous natin, discussion, yung osmotolerant bacteria. So bacteria naman, pag nilagay sila sa hypotonic solution, yung water flows dun sa cells. So this causes the cells to be excess of water naman. So opposite nito, opposite ng hypertonic solution. So yung hypotonic natin causes cells to burst. So ayan, the difference of disinfection and disinfectant, andun din to sa copy nyo. So for the sake of discussion, disinfection is the process of cleaning or removing the microorganism or inanimate surfaces through the use of chemical agents. Ang disinfectant naman is a chemical substance used to kill infection-producing microorganisms on surfaces, but too toxic to be applied directly to tissues. So mechanisms by which chemical disinfectants destroy the microorganisms. First is reaction with components of the cytoplasmic membrane or denaturation of cellular proteins. Then reaction with chiral groups of enzymes or also the damage to RNA and DNA. So you're also able to damage the at molecular level. So the agents damaging the cell membrane May surface active disinfectants tayo. Ito yung cationic detergents, anionic agents, yung non-ionic agents natin, carbowax, 2-in-80, and the amphoteric agents. We also have the phenol and phenolic compounds. So this is the first widely used antiseptic and disinfectant, ang phenol and phenolic compounds. So it is effective in the presence of organics. It remains active for a long period when applied to surfaces. So note that 5% phenol, ang contact time of 10 to 30 minutes is effective for mycobacteria. So 5% phenol at 10 to 30 minutes can kill mycobacteria. So ang phenol natin or the carbolic acid are bacteriostatic at concentrations of 0.1% to 1% and bactericidal or fungicidal or can kill bacteria at 1 to 2%. So ang phenol coefficient natin, it is the measure of the disinfecting power of a substance. It is determined by dividing yung figure indicating the degree of dilution of the disinfectant that kills the microorganism within a given time by that indicating the degree of dilution of phenol killing the microorganisms under similar conditions. So that's yung phenol coefficient example nito, 'di ba? Yung pag phenol coefficient is greater than 1, yung disinfectant is better than phenol. So this is ang phenol coefficient is just comparison of a disinfectant sa phenol. So, or when the phenol coefficient is less than 1, phenol is better than the disinfectant being checked. So, ang positive control natin dito is Staph aureus. And ang negative control natin is, ano tong sal? Sorry, I'll get back to you with, I'm not sure what this is. Baka typo error. Anyway, sa phenol coefficient natin, kung example, ang nakuha natin is 5, so it means yung tinetest natin na disinfectant is stronger than the phenol in terms of disinfection. So pag greater than 1, the disinfectant being looked at is stronger than phenol. So yun lang naman ang concept ng ating phenol coefficient. Ang alcohols naman are non-sporicidal, so they cannot kill bacteria with that produces spores or spore-forming microorganisms. 70% is more effective than 95%. Why? Sino makakasagot? May plus 10 points. Any idea, class? Andiyan ba kayo? Dumami tayo, 101 na. Hello? So, bakit sinasabi na ang 70% alcohol is more effective than 95%? May idea kayo kung bakit? Parinig naman kayo dyan. Andiyan ba kayo?
Ma'am, may I try po?
Yes. Sige, go.
Ma'am, kasi po mas mabilis mag-evaporate.
Ang galing. Sino yan? Hindi ko nakita. Sorry. Hindi ko makita kung... Anong name mo, Miss?
Ma'am, Hanea po. Opo.
Hanea Sabi of 3C. Yes, thank you for that. Tama nga. Pag 95%, mas mabilis siyang mag-evaporate. Kasi yung extra water content slows down. Kaya yung 70% may extra water content niya slows down the evaporation. Therefore, pag nag-slow down yung evaporation, mag-i-increase ang surface contact time. Hence, 'di ba, enhancing effectiveness. So, very good, Miss Hanea. Hanea ba yun? Ayan. Okay, thank you for that. So, alcohols, it is used both as an antiseptic and disinfectant. Disinfectant, bactericidal, and fungicidal. It is bactericidal, but it cannot kill the spore-forming bacteria. So it should be used in concentrations of 60 to 90, but the ideal is 70%. It should be allowed to evaporate from the surface to which they were applied to achieve maximum effectivity. Tama yan. Kasi may nakita ko mga nag-alcohol na after nilang i-apply, basa pa yung kamay nila, gora na agad. No, you have to let it dry. Kasi, di ba, mas na-increase ang surface contact time niya, mas na-enhance ang effectiveness niya. Ayan. So we also have agents, denaturing proteins. So we have the acids and alkalis, diba? It hydrolyzes and coagulates proteins. So basic chemistry, I'm sorry. And we also have agents that modify the functional group of proteins and nucleic acids. We have heavy metals. It destroys microorganisms by inactivation and precipitation of cell proteins. So we have mercury, arsenic, silver, copper, and zinc. We also have oxidizing agents. We have halogens, yung iodine, chlorine, fluorine, bromine, and astatine, and hydrogen peroxide. We also have yung dyes, the triphenylmethane dyes and acridine dyes, and alkylating agents such as aldehyde, 8%, which is composed of 8% formaldehyde and 2% butyraldehyde. It inactivates proteins and nucleic acids, and it is used to sterilize medical instruments, itong aldehyde. Malala ko lang, itong heavy metals na to, there are studies actually that uses this as a mode of to combat yung multi-drug resistance. Kasi pag pinartner mo siya with specific chemicals that can destroy the bacteria or the pathogenic organism within, pag pinartner mo siya, yung effectiveness niya doubles. So may mga studies that uses these heavy metals as as one drug siya na nakipartner siya like sa mga extracts ng plants, ganyan. This is a researches to combat multi-drug resistance na talagang problem nowadays. So under yung alkylating agents natin, we also have ethylene oxide. So ethylene oxide gas also termed as called sterilization, and it is used for materials that cannot be autoclave, like yung rubber goods, plastic tubes, etc. So, ang biological, di ba yung may cold sterilization din tayo kanina under radiation, yung ionizing radiation. So, wag niyong wag niyong i-mix. So, biological indicator natin dito is Bacillus subtilis. The variant is Globigii. For quats or the quaternary ammonium compounds naman, we have the detergents. These are non-tuberculosidal and non-sporicidal. So it cannot kill the spores and it cannot kill tubercles or yung sa mycobacteria. It disrupts cell membrane resulting to leakage ng contents. It is inactivated when exposed to hard water and soap. It is the bacteria is inactivated when exposed to hard water and soap. It's used in lab bench tops, utensils, and dairies and sa restaurants. So example is yung zephyrin natin or benzalkonium chloride and cryprin. Cetylpyrophenium chloride, and ang P. aeruginosa naman or Pseudomonas aeruginosa is resistant to quaternary ammonium compounds. So tandaan nyo yan. May strong bacteria tayo that can withstand this quaternary ammonium compounds. That is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Ang phenolics naman, these are non-sporicidal. So molecules of phenols that have been substituted by halogens, alkyl, phenyl, or benzyl groups. These are stable, biodegradable, and active in the presence of organic material. It is used in hospital floors and surroundings and found in germicidal soap as well. So ang phenolics natin is part of substance in germicidal soap. So we also have narrow spectrum. Sa antibiotics na pala tayo. So under antibiotics, we have the narrow spectrum, which are effective against limited number lang ng pathogens. And we have broad spectrum. Di ba madalas niyan na-encounter broad spectrum antibiotics, narrow spectrum antibiotics. The difference is yung broad is can destroy different kinds of organism, and yung narrow spectrum, it is limited sa specific organisms or specific pathogens. Although yung broad spectrum natin should only be given sa mga malala or mixed infections, kasi para maiwasan natin yung talagang problem ngayon na MDR or yung multi-drug resistance. So ayan, under the narrow spectrum, you just have to familiarize yourselves, or kung kaya, you have to memorize talaga. Yan ang mahirap sa bakte, kailangan talaga mag-memorize. So ayan, yung narrow spectrum natin, yung bacitracin, clindamycin, and the likes. Yung broad spectrum natin, yung ampicillin, cephalosporin, carfenicol. Yan. MIC naman, MIC is a minimum inhibitory concentration, and MLC is minimum lethal concentration. Pero in some researches, ang ginagamit is not MLC, it's MBC or minimal bactericidal concentration, but it's one and the same. So it's either minimum lethal concentration or minimal bactericidal concentration. So the difference is ang minimum inhibitory concentration test is the lowest, or determining the lowest concentration of a drug that inhibits the bacterial growth. So it is a test that determines the antimicrobial activity ng material against a specific bacteria. The lowest concentration of a test agent prevents yung appearance of turbidity. Turbidity is definitive, it means growth. So, yung intensity of turbidity pag sa dilution, diba? It means growth. So, it is considered to be minimal or minimum inhibitory concentration. So, pag dilution test agent is, pag ganito na, ang dilution test agent natin is bacteriostatic at MIC. It's not bactericidal, it's bacteriostatic. Yan ang difference nila ng MLC, kasi ang MLC is bactericidal concentration nga, diba? Or MBC. Pangit, sorry. Ayan. So, MBC is the lowest concentration naman ng drug that kills the bacterial growth. So, this inhibits and this kills the bacteria. So, ayan, we have the target sites. So, mga target sites ng antibiotics. We have antibiotics that inhibit cell wall synthesis ng bacteria. Meron tayong nagta-target ng protein synthesis ng bacteria. Meron ding nag-inhibit ng nucleic acid synthesis and inhibit cell membrane function. So, ito yung tinatarget or target sites ng antibiotics natin to kill the pathogens. So, meron kayong table na to sa handout nyo. Please review this na lang, itong table, and familiarize yourself. Actually, mukha lang siyang madami, pero you can cluster this naman. Kasi depende sa mechanism of action ng specific antimicrobial class na andito. So, sa mechanism of actions and the spectrum of activity, you can cluster these different antimicrobial classes na listed here. Na example, di ba, pag binding and, inhibition of protein synthesis by binding to 30S, ano yung mga yon? Di ba, fluoroquinones, yan, ilistan nyo kung ano yung mga antimicrobial class. Kung 50S naman, na nag-inhibit ng protein synthesis, example, chloramphenicol, ketolides, yung erythromycin, ganun. So please check this na lang. Di ba you all have copies of yung handout from Sir Ken nyo. So we will not dwell dito. Okay lang, class, kasi there's no use. It's self-explanatory. Like binding and disruption of cell membrane, you know that already. You just have to remember that it is lipopeptides or the daptomycin. So, okay lang. Self-study in this part. I take that as a yes. Silence means yes, diba? Okay, so let's move on to clinical laboratory safety. This is the last part of our your discussion with the main. And in clinical, sorry, wait lang. Ayan. Sorry, nag-chat si Sir Ken yun. In-announce niya pala na may quiz ng Saturday, although may nagsabi nga na may conflict. So, kakausapin ko na lang siya after this class. Anyway, sa clinical laboratory safety natin, let's go back sa historical perspective lang, no? So, before 1980, safety practices in most clinical laboratories were lax, and common practices include yung mouth pipetting. Alam mo niyo, nung college, naka-record to pero nung college, muntik pagawa sa amin to nung nasa CSO ako. Mouth pipetting, but I said, no way. Buti hindi siya natuloy. Kasi, Diyos ko, anong year na yun? Tapos mag-mouth pipetting pa kami. Ayan. Eating, drinking, and smoking sa loob ng lab, they do that before. So the emergence of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or yung AIDS natin, ushered in safety concerns, resulting in new practice such as awareness and reducing the risk of biohazard materials. So yung key components ng safety program for the clinical laboratory, actually this is just a review, di ba, na-tackle nyo to for sure sa clinical chem nyo. But first is yung addressing yung biological hazards. And also to describe safe handling, storage, and disposal of chemical and radioactive substances. Kaya meron tayong mga manuals and guidelines that are needed in the laboratory. We also have yung policies in the event of emergencies. So the outline of laboratory or hospital policies is important. Ang DOH may specific programs for this ng mga infection prevention control, ganyan, for the hospitals. Perform initial safety training for all employees. This is important because employees, especially sa microbiology laboratory, employees should be aware or should have knowledge kung paano i-handle ang mga organisms or how to perform tests na hindi sila sloppy. Kasi diba, napakadelikado. Na iuwi nila, pag-uwi nila yung infection. Napaka-risky. Also to teach correct techniques for lifting and moving objects. Yan nga, bawal ng sloppy. We also have yung OSHA, familiar kayo siguro dito, yung Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So, safety training, it involves safety training for employees, potentially exposed employees, and the goal is to protect the workers as always. Okay. Ayan. So, requirement ng OSHA is to determine tasks or procedures that may result in occupational hazards. So, it involves planning, or a plan to investigate exposure and prevent recurrences, methods of compliance with universal precautions, diba? And engineering and work practice controls, yung wearing of PPEs, proper wearing of PPEs, guidelines sa workplace cleanliness, guidelines for handling disposal of regulated waste, and the training program for all employees. Ang universal precautions natin, diba? It was developed in 1985 and redone in 1996, which says that all blood and body fluids are treated as infectious. So itong hindi niyo dapat kalimutan sa buong buhay niyo. Ating universal or standard precaution. So it includes non-intact skin and mucous membrane. So the lone exception is sweat. Ayan. So in clinical laboratory safety, individuals are exposed in various ways to laboratory-acquired infections in microlab. So this involves the following: yung rubbing ng eyes or nose with contaminated hands, inhaling aerosols produced during centrifugation, vortexing is yung mixing natin, or spills of liquid cultures, or accidentally ingesting microorganisms by putting pens or fingers in the mouth. Oh my God, don't do this, please. Okay, nag-intern. Ayan. Suffering percutaneous inoculation that is being punctured by needle stick, yes. So, ang PPE is very important, and it is necessary to protect you or the personnel from hazards encountered during the course of work. This usually includes plastic shields or goggles to protect workers from droplets, disposal containers for sharp objects, holders of glass bottles, tray in which carry small hazardous items like blood culture bottles. Yes, importante yan. Pag nag-ward kayo, hindi nyo dapat hawak-hawak ng blood culture bottle pabalik ng laboratory, lalo na pag two sides siya, left and right, na dalawang bottle, that may container kayo for it. Handheld pipetting devices, impervious gowns, laboratory coats, and etc. HEPA respirators are required for all healthcare workers, including phlebotomists, to enter rooms of patients with tuberculosis and also to clean up spills of pathogenic microorganisms. I think due to COVID, mas naging aware ang lahat, no, sa clinical lab safety, kasi nung time ko and even when I was working, hindi siya nung wala pang COVID. We do the standard, pero minimum standard lang talaga. We don't, parang unlike now na pagpasok mo sa lab, kahit hindi ka naman sa molecular lab, the precaution is there. Yung level of the standard precaution is being observed. So we have this biosafety cabinets, or the BSCs. It is also called a biological safety cabinet or microbiological safety cabinet. So it is an enclosed, ventilated laboratory workspace for safely working with materials contaminated with pathogens requiring a defined biosafety level. So unlike sa clinical chemistry na ang workplace mo is like a table, tapos pasak ka lang ng sak ng dugo doon, dito sa microbiology lab, you have a specific work area. Hindi ka lang dapat sa tabletop. And this is the BSC, or the biosafety cabinet. So this serves as means to protect the laboratory worker and the surrounding environment from pathogens. So all exhaust air is HEPA filtered as it exits the biosafety cabinet. So this removes harmful bacteria and viruses. So you'll know the mechanism later on. Anyway, yung HEPA filter natin is a type ng pleated mechanical air filter. Acronym siya ng High Efficiency Particulate Air, HEPA filter. So High Efficiency Particulate Air filter. We have classes ng BSC. So first natin is the BSC class 1. So the air velocity is 75 linear feet per minute. Unsterilized room air enters the circulated. So ganyan siya. Ang BSC class 1 natin, ito yung nakita nyo dito, class 1 BSC. It allows room or yung unsterilized air to pass into the cabinet, as you can see here, to pass into the cabinet, hence the yellow arrow, the room air or unsterilized air. To pass into the cabinet and around the area and material within sa cabinet. So this sterilize only yung air na na-exhaust, but it does not sterilize yung air na pumapasok. So sa figure, yung room air flows into the cabinet and is circulated out through a high efficiency, or yung HEPA filter natin, high efficiency particulate air filter, and the exhaust portal. Ito yung exhaust portal natin. Ayan. Ang BSC class 2 naman natin, air velocity is 75 to 100 linear feet per minute. So this is also known as the vertical laminar flow. So there is no culture contamination when working in this BSc class, and this sterilizes both the air entering and circulating the cabinet. Unlike yung BSc 1 natin na yung exhaust ay yung lumalabas na air na lang ang na-sterilize. Ito yung air entering and circulating is being sterilized by through HEPA filter and exhaust air. So this is used by most hospital microbiology laboratories. So may dalawa tayong subtypes pa rin, 2A tsaka 2B. Anyway, sa figure, sa figure, the air is pulled dito sa class 2. Ito yon. The air is pulled into the cabinet and circulated through an airflow plenum through 2 levels of HEPA filter prior to exiting through the exhaust portals. So sundan nyo lang to, ito yung room air, tapos yung contaminated air. Hindi siya dumadaan sa specimen kasi andito yung specimen. Parang when you're working sa BSc classroom, there is a specific pressure na humihigop nung pumapasok na air dito sa may bandang elbow nyo when you're working. Dito siya banda, doon sa may opening, para hindi pumasok diretso yung room air sa specimen to avoid contamination. Pumapasok muna siya dyan, then pinifilter niya. So yung contaminated air natin na filter na siya ang nagfo-flow dito sa specimen nyo and also yung lumalabas. Ayan. So this is further, sabi ko nga kanina, further differentiated siya sa type A and type B depending on the inlet flow velocity and percent ng air that is HEPA filtered and circulated. So sabi ko yung 2A, di ba? Exhausts air inside the room. So this A is a self-contained, and 70% ng air is recirculated. 70% ng air is recirculated in the working area. And B naman, the exhaust air is discharged outside the building. So this is to be used if we deal with toxic chemicals and carcinogenic specimens, etong 2B. So last BSc class, we have BSc class 3. So ito na yung highest level of safety. All air entering and leaving the cabinet is sterilized with HEPA filter. So the system is entirely closed, walang opening. Unlike yung B, di ba sabi ko may opening pa siya, pero yung kasi doon kayo mag-work wala naman siyang lalagyan ng kamay unlike this one. So the system is entirely closed and all infectious materials are handled with with rubber gloves that are sealed to the cabinet. This is for viruses. Although ang COVID does not need, according to standard, WHO and CDC, I guess it's not BSc class 3, it's BSc class 2 for COVID. So this biosafety class is completely enclosed, as I've said, with negative pressure. Kasi ang ini-aim is the maximum protection to the lab from any aerosolized particles. So the infectious material within is handled with rubber gloves. Don't forget that. Okay, last topic. Please stay with me, class. Andiyan pa ba kayo? Ay, andiyan pa. 103 pa kayo. Ayan. So ano nga ba ang biosafety? What's the difference? Tsaka BSc tsaka biosafety cabinet and but may biosafety level. So ang biosafety is the application of safety precaution na that reduce a laboratorian's risk ng exposure to a potentially infectious microbe, and it limits the contamination of the work environment. So biosafety levels, may 4 tayo, BSL 1, 2, 3, and 4. So each level has specific controls for containment of microbes and biological agents. And the primary risk that determines levels of containment are yung infectivity niya, severity ng disease, transmissibility niya, tsaka nature of the work conducted. So the origin ng microbe, tsaka yung agent in question, and the route of exposure are very important. Or are considered sa BS biosafety level classes na to, levels na to. And each biosafety level has its own specific containment control that are required for laboratory practices, safety equipment, tsaka facility construction. So aside from this, let's tackle this one by one, di ba? Ito yung nasa copy nyo kay Sir Ken. So let's just go a little deeper para ma-appreciate nyo yung differences ng biosafety levels na to. So this is from CDC. So biosafety level 1, just to remind you, yung BSL 1 to 4, yung levels na yun, each biosafety level builds on the controls of the level before it. So pag BSL 2, sasabihin natin, ina-adapt na niya yung control ng BSL 1. Okay, so in BSL 1, these are the specific considerations. In laboratory practice, there is standard microbiological practices are followed and work can be performed on an open lab bench or table. So, BSL 1 lang ang kailangan ng precaution kapag when you perform in an open lab bench or table. So, safety equipment natin is of course PPE, such as lab coats, gloves, eye protections, and are worn as needed. Ang facility construction natin, there must be a sink available for hand washing, and the lab should have doors to separate the working space with the rest of the facility. So if you work in a lab that is designated for BSL1, ang microbes that are not, ang I-handle mo dito are microbes that are not known to consistently cause disease in healthy adults and also present lang in minimal potential hazard. Kasi nga, isipin mo na sa open lab bench or sa table ka lang nag-work, you're not using a biosafety cabinet. So an example of a microbe that is typically worked at BSL1 is yung non-pathogenic strains natin ng E. coli. Going to level 2, so sabi ko nga, di ba, yung BSL2 natin builds upon the control of BSL1. So if you work in a lab that is designated for BSL2, yung microbes dapat dito should pose moderate hazards lang to the lab environment. So i-consider natin sa laboratory practice, yung access to the laboratory should be restricted when work is being conducted. Sa safety equipment natin, PPE pa rin, it's worn including lab coats and gloves na. Eye protection and face shields can also be worn as needed. All procedures that can cause infection from aerosols or splashes are performed within a biological safety cabinet. An autoclave or an alternative method of decontamination is available for proper disposal. Facility construction naman, self-closing doors, and a sink and eye wash should be readily available. So, the microbes natin that are typically indigenous and associated with diseases of varying severity are being handled here. So, example ng microbe natin dito could be Staph aureus. Sa BSL 2 natin siya hina-handle. BSL 3 naman, yung microbes natin dito can be either indigenous or exotic, and they can cause serious or potentially lethal disease through respiratory transmission. So yun ang mga hinahandle natin dito. Kaya ang lab practices involves laboratorians to be under medical surveillance and might receive immunization for microbes that they are working with. So access to the laboratory is restricted and controlled at all times. Ang safety equipment natin is also PPE, respirators might be required. Kaya yan ang nakikita nyo dito na susuot-suot ng laboratorian. All work with microbes must be performed within an appropriate BSc. So di ba na alam nyo na kanina yung BSc classes natin. So depends kung ano yung handle nyo, yun ang dapat na BSc biosafety cabinet na andyan. So facility construction naman, hands-free sink. Wow, meron ba nun dito sa Pilipinas, hands-free sink? Meron siguro. Eye wash and are available near the exit. So exhaust air cannot be recirculated and the laboratory must have sustained directional flow by drawing air into the laboratory from clean areas towards potentially contaminated areas. Tama, yung airflow natin should come from clean area papunta dun sa contaminated area and not the other way around. Now, entrance to the lab is through two sets of self-closing and locking doors. So usually, ang example ng microbe natin dito is MTB or Mycobacterium tuberculosis. For BSL-4, which is the last BSL, in addition to BSL-3 considerations, BSL-4 laboratories have the following containment requirements. Yung change ng clothing before entering. So, may donning and doffing area dapat kayo. Shower, mag-shower kayo upon exiting, and decontaminate all materials before exiting. So, safety equipment nyo naman, all work with the microbe must be performed in appropriate class 3. So, specified na class 3 by safety cabinet, and bring a full body air supplied positive pressure suit. Kagaya ng nakikita nyo dito. So facility naman, may separate building or an the laboratory should be in a separate building or isolated and restricted zone of building, and the laboratory has dedicated supply or exhaust air as well as vacuum lines and decontamination systems. So mga microbes na wino-work up dito could include yung those that are dangerous and exotic and posing a high risk of aerosol transmitted infection. And infections caused by these microbes are frequently fatal without treatment or vaccines. So example, di ba yung Ebola natin or the Marburg viruses. Ayan, so sa bioterrorism categories naman natin, this is again from CDC, but you have meron din kayo dito, sa handout nyo. This is just on a deeper sense. Ang categories kasi natin, category A, can be easily disseminated or transmitted from person to person and result in high mortality rates that have the potential for major public health impact. So example niyan, yung anthrax natin, botulism, yung plague, smallpox, yan ang sinasabing bioterrorism category A. Pag category B naman, these are the second highest priority agents that include yung moderately or easy to disseminate. These are also moderate lang na morbidity rates. So example nito yung brucellosis, epsilon toxin ng Clostridium perfringens, salmonella, and the likes. Ang category C naman natin is the third highest priority agent that includes yung emerging pathogens that could be engineered for mass dissemination in the future because of its availability, ease ng production niya, tsaka potential for high morbidity and mortality. So example natin is yung Nipah virus and the hantavirus. Sa category C sa handout nyo, example din dyan is Ebola, MERS-CoV, yellow fever virus, and hemorrhagic fever. Fever virus. Ayan. Ayan na pala yung last slide ko. Nandiyan pa kayo, guys?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Ayan.
Yes, ma'am.
So, sorry, sabi ko 1 hour lang yun, pero inabot tayo ng, nagsobra tayong 15 minutes. Anyway,